The streets of Manhattan pulsed with the usual rhythm of city life. Horns blaring, people rushing, and the hum of ambition lingering in the air. Among the crowd, Adabo Adoko weaved through the busy streets in his delivery truck, navigating toward the construction site that loomed ahead. It was a towering structure in its early phases, its steel frame cutting sharply into the city skyline. Abe parked near the entrance and grabbed his clipboard. His uniform, a reflective vest over a faded blue shirt, bore the logo of the construction supply company he worked for. As he stepped out, he took a deep breath, pushing aside the exhaustion from working back-to-back shifts. He had come to America with dreams bigger than this, but for now, this job paid the bills and kept his wife and infant daughter housed and fed. Approaching the foreman, he spotted the man in charge, Richard Grant. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face hardened by years of command, Richard had the air of someone who had never questioned his own authority. Abe had encountered men like him before. They saw people like him as disposable, temporary fixtures in a world they considered their own. "Excuse me, sir," Abe said, keeping his voice even, professional. He held out the delivery form. "I have your shipment of concrete reinforcements. Could you sign off on this?" Richard barely glanced at the paper before waving dismissively. "Leave it over there." He pointed to a random spot near the edge of the lot. Abe hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but the instructions specify that it needs to be unloaded near the foundation area and signed for." Richard turned fully toward him now, his expression shifting from indifference to irritation. "You're just the delivery guy," he sneered. "Do what you're told and don't make this harder than it needs to be." A tense silence hung in the air. Abe felt heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Sir, I'm just following company policy." Richard let out a laugh, cutting him off. "Company policy? Do you even understand what we're doing here? This isn't some simple construction job," he said, gesturing toward the skeletal framework of the skyscraper. "This is a multi-million-dollar project. People like you wouldn't get it. People like you." Abe clenched his jaw. He had faced this before. In Nigeria, he had been a civil engineer, respected, capable, and ambitious. But in America, his credentials meant nothing without recertification, and without the means to afford it. He had to take whatever work he could find. He nodded curtly and walked away, unloading the materials where Richard had demanded. As he climbed back into his truck, his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. One day, he told himself, one day, men like Richard Grant would see him for who he truly was. That evening, in their small apartment in the Bronx, Abe recounted the encounter to his wife, Miriam. "He didn't even see me as a person," Abe said, shaking his head. "Just some guy who doesn't belong." Miriam, ever the voice of reason, placed a hand over his. "You know who you are, Abe. Don't let someone like that make you doubt yourself." "I came here to build a better life for us," Abe sighed. "But it feels like every step forward, someone is trying to push me back." "You've worked too hard to give up now," she said firmly. "Keep looking for opportunities. Someone will see your worth." Her words stuck with him. A week later, when he received an email from a prestigious construction firm inviting him for an interview, he felt a surge of hope. They had seen his application, one he had sent months ago, long before he started driving trucks, and were interested in his expertise. "This could be it," he told Miriam, his excitement barely contained. "Then go and show them what you can do," she encouraged. On the day of the interview, Abe arrived early, dressed in his best suit. The corporate office was sleek, modern, a stark contrast to the construction sites he was used to. As he was led into the conference room, his heart pounded, and then he saw him, Richard Grant, the same Richard Grant who had humiliated him. For a moment, Richard's expression shifted from confusion to recognition. Then his eyes narrowed. "I remember you," Richard said, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're the delivery guy." Abe straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir," he said, "and I'm here today as a candidate for the senior consultant position." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Richard scoffed but said nothing. The interview commenced, and Abe spoke passionately about his experience managing large-scale projects in Nigeria, his knowledge of sustainable building methods, and his vision for urban development. The panelists seemed impressed, but Richard wasn't done. "Interesting theories," he said, his smirk widening. "But real-world projects require more than just ideas. Do you really think you're ready for something of this scale?" Abe met his gaze, unwavering. "I don't just think so, sir. I know it." His confidence sent a ripple through the room. Even the panelists exchanged intrigued glances. A week later, he received the email that changed everything. He had been selected. On his first day at the new job, Abe walked onto the same Manhattan construction site. But this time, he wasn't wearing a reflective vest. He wasn't carrying a clipboard as a delivery worker. He was carrying a leather-bound notebook, dressed in a crisp suit, ready to lead. The foreman and crew watched curiously as he approached the main office. Inside, Richard was hunched over blueprints, grumbling about scheduling delays. When Abe stepped through the door, Richard looked up. Recognition dawned. "You're the new consultant?" Richard asked, his voice tight. "That's right," Abe replied smoothly. "I'm here to ensure everything runs smoothly." Richard stiffened. "I don't need someone overseeing me. I've been managing projects like this for years." "I'm here to collaborate, not undermine anyone," Abe responded. "We both have the same goal, to deliver the best results for this project." The shift in power was undeniable. Richard was no longer in control, and it clearly unsettled him. The first team meeting only deepened the divide. Abe laid out his vision for improving efficiency and addressing project delays. The foremen and engineers listened, nodding in agreement. But Richard leaned back, arms crossed. "This is real-world construction," he scoffed. "We don't have time for experiments." Abe turned to face him directly. "Mr. Grant, these experiments are proven methods I've implemented on larger projects overseas. They save time, money, and resources. I'm confident they'll work here, if we work together." Richard smirked. "And if they don't?" "Then we adapt. But dismissing solutions before trying them isn't leadership. It's fear of change." A heavy silence settled over the room. The foreman exchanged looks. Some nodded in agreement. Richard had no response. Later that day, Abe approached him privately. "Mr. Grant," he said calmly, "I know you have experience, and I respect that, but respect needs to go both ways." Richard crossed his arms, defensive. "When I was a delivery driver, you dismissed me without knowing who I was or what I was capable of," Abe continued. "I'm not here to hold grudges. I'm here to get the job done. But we can't succeed if we don't treat each other as equals." Richard didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, he seemed to consider Abe's words. "We'll see," he muttered before walking away. Despite Richard's reluctance, Abe's leadership began to shine. His clear communication and methodical approach won over the crew. With his expertise, the project began making rapid progress. Delays were reduced, costs optimized, and efficiency increased. Richard, on the other hand, found himself increasingly isolated. His combative attitude and refusal to adapt made him a liability rather than an asset. He was no longer the authoritative voice in the room. People now turned to Abe for guidance. It wasn't long before the higher-ups took notice. During a site inspection, the executives of the company observed the operations closely. Abe walked them through the progress, highlighting key improvements and the benefits of the sustainable construction methods he had implemented. The executives were visibly impressed. "Your approach has turned this project around," one of them remarked. But not everyone was pleased. Richard sat at the edge of the meeting, arms crossed, his face betraying his frustration. A few days later, the company made an announcement. Richard was being demoted. His inability to work collaboratively and resistance to innovation had cost him his position. He was no longer the lead project manager. Abe had effectively taken over as the guiding force behind the project. Richard was furious, but there was nothing he could do. The once proud and arrogant construction manager was now just another employee taking orders from the man he had once belittled. It was a harsh, yet necessary lesson in humility. For months, he kept his head down, avoiding interactions with Abe unless absolutely necessary. But the truth weighed on him. His pride had blinded him to the talents of the very man he had insulted. He had judged Abe without knowing his capabilities, and now That same man had succeeded where he had failed. One evening, as the project neared completion, Richard did something he had never done before. He swallowed his pride. He found Aid reviewing blueprints in the main office. "Aid," he said, hesitating. Aid looked up, surprised by the use of his first name. Richard cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Aid set down his pen, giving Richard his full attention. "I was wrong about you," Richard admitted, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. And I let my own stubbornness get in the way of progress." Aid studied him for a moment before speaking. "Apology accepted. But respect isn't just in words, Richard. It's in actions." Richard nodded. He understood. From that day forward, Richard was no longer the man he used to be. He worked harder, listened more, and for the first time in his career, learned the value of humility. The project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, an achievement that earned Aid widespread recognition. His leadership had transformed the work environment, proving that success was built on collaboration, not arrogance. But he didn't stop there. Using his new platform, Aid advocated for hiring practices that recognized the talents of immigrants and minorities. He knew firsthand how hard it was for people like him to be seen for their true potential. He also started a mentorship program for recent migrants in the engineering field, giving them the support he wished he had when he first arrived in America. His story spread across the industry. A man once dismissed as just a delivery guy had risen to become one of the most respected professionals in the field. Richard, once a man who thrived on control, had learned his lesson the hard way. But thanks to that lesson, he changed. Though he would never match Aid's brilliance, he became a better leader, one who listened, adapted, and most importantly, respected those around him. One evening, Aid returned home to his wife and daughter. As he walked into their apartment, Miriam met him with a smile. "How was work?" she asked. Aid kissed her forehead and smiled. "Let's just say karma has a way of setting things right." She chuckled. "I told you. Someone would see your worth." He nodded, pulling her and their daughter into a warm embrace. "And now, it's my turn to help others see theirs." The story of Aid and Richard became more than just an example of karma. It was a testament to resilience, dignity, and the power of character. No matter how the world tried to define him, Aid had rewritten his own narrative, and in the end, justice had prevailed.